As Yu-Gi-Oh players, we're all no stranger to endless torment, so maybe you'll recognize number 10 card on this list, Nightmare Wheel. This trap became part of the game with the 2003 set Pharaonic Guardian, and saw a smattering of competitive placements. While it worked best with burn and stall decks, strategies built around Uriah, Lord of Syrian Flames, would also sometimes take Nightmare Wheel for a spin. You can flip your set Nightmare Wheel by targeting an opponent's monster, rendering it unable to attack or change its battle position. When that monster leaves the field, so does Nightmare Wheel. But while both are face up, your opponent will get burned for 500 points of damage during each of your standby phases. It's kind of a slightly more restrictive Mask of the Accursed, and the use case is pretty quickly evident here. Nightmare Wheel can freeze an opponent's monster and chip away their life points, but it does leave your opponent plenty of ways to get around it. They can tribute the equipped monster, or in later formats, use it as material for a Synchro, Xyz, or Link summon, which makes this card kind of difficult to use in the modern age. But in GOAT format, Nightmare Wheel rose out in slower lockdown and control strategies, where opponents have less direct avenues of clearing their own monsters. But in Duel Links, Nightmare Wheel wasn't added to the game until January of 2024, way past when it would have been most useful. Still, it did see some experimentation in Trickstar decks that love to pelt an opponent with small burns. However, nothing definitive emerged. Nightmare Wheel's highest profile anime appearance came in the Battle City Finals in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, where it was used by Merrick Ishtar, a sadistic villain who enjoyed tormenting his opponents before vaporizing them with his god cards. But the Nightmare Wheel would spin again, used by Dr. Collector in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, Sid in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and Anna Kaboom in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. But while it has some anime love and competitive use, there's not much more to say about this more painful spellbinding circle, which makes it a great fit for the number 10 spot. Traveling from one ordeal to another, the number 9 continuous trap on this list is Ordeal of a Traveler, also from 2003's Pharaonic Guardian set. The best players don't just play around the cards on the field, they play their opponent. Ordeal of a Traveler can facilitate this by forcing your opponent to solve a little riddle every time they declare an attack. They must guess whether a random card in your hand is a spell, trap, or monster, and their attack will only go through on a correct designation. Failing this check results in the attacking monster getting bounced to the hand. There is no once per turn or limitation on the ordeal, just the mind game between you and your opponent of which card is which. Of course, the more times your opponent attacks through ordeal, the more intel they'll have on the cards you hold. But by keeping a diverse and well-shuffled hand, they might be stuck guessing forever. As far as defensive continuous traps go, Ordeal of a Traveler isn't going to get the same mileage as raw floodgates like Wall of Revealing Light or Gravity Bind. But importantly, it is infuriating. You can probably count on an opponent who struggles through this ordeal to start playing not so good, opening up a downward spiral of chances for you to capitalize on their misplays. Add Degenerate Circuit into the mix to make your opponent's bounce cards get banished instead if you're feeling a little extra mean. Ordeal of a Traveler has one anime appearance in episode 188 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. Used by the mysterious duelist Aptonarg Odom against Joey Wheeler, the ordeal would first bounce Goblin Attack Force before Joey realized Aptonarg's hand consisted of only Sinister Serpent, allowing Guilford the Lightning to solve the Sphinx's riddle. Aptonarg Odom would reveal himself to be Grandpa Moto spelled backwards, and Joey would celebrate this victory, unaware that it was the last he'd get in the entire series. Ordeal of a Traveler has a few nods to other cards and stories, from its depiction of Guardian Sphinx to the myth of Oedipus that inspired its effect. While traveling, Oedipus encounters the Great Sphinx and its riddle. Successfully answering the creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 during the day, and 3 in the evening will allow him to pass. Unfortunately, if he misses the question, he'll get devoured instead of just being bounced to the hand. A true traveler's ordeal, the myth of Oedipus, is thousands of years old, so if you've somehow managed to avoid spoilers from before the Common Era, don't worry about averting your eyes, because we're not getting into it. And crowding into number 8, we have Human Wave Tactics from the 2004 set Ancient Sanctuary. This continuous trap revolves around the end phase. It allows you to special summon level 2 or lower norm monsters from your deck, equal to the number of level 2 or lower norm monsters destroyed by battle during the turn. While level 2 and lower normals as a restriction initially seems quite limiting, there are some surprisingly good options, like DD Trainer, Charcoal Pachi, and Oppressed People, who all supplement their very low levels with 2000 plus defense. While Human Wave Tactics never really worked in the competitive TCG, it has since become viable in GOAT format, where these low-level defenders make better walls. For the offensive component to these strategies, the idea is to use equip spells that scale with your quantity of monsters, like Sword of the Soul Eater and United We Stand. And don't forget Moki Moki. There are a bunch in Human Wave Tactics' card art, and they're commonly used alongside the card and the continuous spell Moki Moki Smackdown, which resolves when a fairy monster is destroyed while you have Moki Moki on the field to supercharge their attack. With a few extra human wave tactics, compatible fairies like Dancing Elf and Mystic Shineball, Moki Moki Smackdown can turn your line of fluffy Moki Mokis into a board-breaking force of 3000 attack beaters. On the defensive side of things, human wave tactics' emphasis on low levels also leaves room for stall using cards like Level Limit Area B and Gravity Bind. Often when we think of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the cards that come to mind are the singularly powerful forces capable of warping the game around their very presence. But Human Wave Tactics takes a different beat. One Moki Moki all alone is easily vanquished. But what about an endless horde of normals that self-replenish and thin your deck until you draw an equip spell that takes their attack through the roof? The odds of being crushed by an enormous pile of Moki Mokis and Mystical Shineballs are very low, but never zero. Solidifying its legacy as a decent trap monster by taking the number 7 spot is Metal Reflect Slime, a continuous trap from the 2008's Phantom Darkness set. Releasing in the twilight months of Classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Before the dawn of Synchros, Metal Reflect Slime iterated on mostly unsuccessful prior trap monsters like Embodiment of Apophis and Zoma the Spirit, by having way more stats. Although it would hit the field with 0 attack, Metal Reflect Slime's monster form had a whopping 3000 defense, and with no conditions on its activation, could be an instant premium wall. It was also a level 10 Aqua monster, which wasn't immediately super important, but would become noteworthy in time, and we'll get to that in a bit. But first, what Metal Reflect Slime's high stats couldn't defend against, as a monster that was also a trap card, Metal Reflect Slime was vulnerable to almost every form of removal. It sucks when you're clearable by both Mystical Space Typhoon and Dark Hole. Like Nightmare Wheel from earlier in this list, Metal Reflect Slime would also find a spot in deck lists with Uriel, Lord of Searing Flames, and would sometimes get included as a defensive tech in various side decks, if not core strategies. 12 years after Metal Reflect Slime's release, 2020's legendary Duelist Rage of Ra set would introduce Egyptian God Slime, a level 10 Water Aqua fusion monster with 3000 attack and defense. You could hard fuse into this card with any Aqua monster plus a level 10 Water, but it was much easier to use its alternate summoning condition of distributing a level 10 Aqua monster with 0 attack. Rage of Ra would also provide Guardian Slime, and that worked as a material too, but by far the easiest way to field Egyptian God Slime was by activating and then tributing Metal Reflect Slime. While Ra strategies have never been a threat to equal the power of the gods in the anime, the new God Fusion was a fun way of bridging the gap between classic cards and their modern counterparts. Speaking of the anime, Metal Reflect Slime was totally different there. Instead of 0 attack and 3000 defense, the Metal Reflect Slime of the anime and manga could only be activated in response to the attack of an opponent that reduced your life points by more than half. Following this, Metal Reflect Slime would spawn a slime token with stats equal to 3/4 the value of that monster's attack. This is actually the impetus behind Egyptian God Slime stat line of 3000, since that card is based on that time Yami Merrick made a slime mimic of the 4000 Obelisk the Tormentor in episode 140 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime. For number 6, we're getting lost in the Labyrinth of Nightmare. This continuous trap from the 2004 set Ancient Sanctuary had kind of a silly effect. During each player's end phase, the battle position of face-up monsters they control gets swapped. Your defense mode monsters go on the offense, and anything in attack position starts defending. While Labyrinth of Nightmare doesn't provide the same battle-based defense utility as Floodgates like Level Limit Area B and Gravity Bind, you might find it useful for resetting your Goblin Attack Force and Spear Dragon Goat format low-level beatdown deck. But then, if you're using Labyrinth of Nightmare in Goat format, which is where it sees actual play, you're probably pairing it with the Clowns. Dream Clown and Crass Clown might not share attributes or typings or stat lines, but they do share similar effects. When Dream Clown switches from attack to defense position, it can destroy a card without targeting. When Crass Clown switches from defense position to attack position, it bounces the monsters from your opponent's side of the field. Together with Blade Rabbit, a card that's not a clown, but does destroy an opposing monster when shifted to attack to defense, these performers and their vicious bunny form the crux of clown control. This GOAT format strategy aims to generate advantage by continuously shifting the positions of monsters across the field, using cards like Stumbling, Zero Gravity, and of course, Labyrinth of Nightmare. The frequency of position changing also allows clown control decks to use cards like Tragedy, which can be instantly triggered by Earthquake or any of the other previously mentioned position flippers. More modern archetypes that benefit from constant mode swapping like Morphtronics, Karakuris, and Digital Bugs might find some use somewhere for Labyrinth of Nightmare, but really this card is for the clowns, and that's not a bad thing. They even had their heyday in Duel Links as one of the game's earliest dominant meta strategies. One more interesting note about Labyrinth of Nightmare, there's a set that also goes by Labyrinth of Nightmare. So although we're leaving the Labyrinth and all of its clowns behind, as we move on to the next card, we're not going far, Since this list's number 5 pick, Skull Lair comes from that 2003 set. Skull Lair is a pretty cool card. It lets you banish any number of monster cards from your graveyard to destroy a monster on field with a level equal to the number of removed cards. As a continuous trap card that lets you do something without specifying a set of activation conditions, you can trigger Skull Lair at spell speed 2 whenever there's a face-up monster on the board and enough monsters in your graveyard to clear it. Right off the jump, it's not hard to see what kinds of decks might find use for a card like Skull Lair. Lightsworn's penchant for milling cards easily pulls materials in grave, which in turn can set up your Punishment Dragon after using Skull Lair to banish your grave while picking apart your opponent's board. Cards like Needlebug Nest that thin your deck can also give Skull Lair some much needed juice, and cards that activate on Banish might discover some niche utility here as well. Banishment recursors like DD's Scout Plane can continuously power your plays and removals, and dinosaurs might find use of Skull Lair to pop their own baby Ceratosaurus while building up their banishment for Tyranno Infinity or bringing Giant Rex back to the field. It can ensure against bad rolls with Snipe Hunter and bolster Grand Magi de Aiza, but the card most commonly paired with Skull Lair is Bazo the Soul Eater, which might seem a little confusing at first glance. Bazu is a level 4 light beast with 1600 attack that can boost itself up to 2500 with its effect to banish up to 3 monsters from grave, gaining 300 attack for each. While it's true that Bazu and Skull Lair both draw reagents from their effects from the same source, it's also true that you can only run so many copies of Bazu. Skull Lair can function kind of like a safety net for when you can't access your banishing beater, allowing you to gain advantage through its removal effect while preparing for a game-ending activation of Dimension Fusion or return from a different dimension. Those cards might be both banned in the OCG and TCG, but in GOAT format they're legal, and so are Bazu the Soul Eater and Skull Lair. From one skull to another, number 4 goes to Skull Invitation, releasing back in the 2002 set Pharaoh's Servant. Skull Invitation is one of those burn cards that impacts both players, punishing anyone who sends a card to the grave with 300 damage inflicted per card. While a single instance of 300 damage isn't a lot during long games or against decks that love to dump the graves, the numbers stack surprisingly fast, especially when combined with other cards that make your opponent regret playing the game, like Chain Energy or Red Eye's Flare Metal Dragon. Rivalry of Nightmare can add another 300 to every Skull Invitation activation for even more tiny burns. Remember Needlebug Nest from while we were talking about Skull Lair? For Skull Invitation, let's take a look at Needleworm. When Worm flips, your opponent mills 5 cards. Under Skull Invitation, that comes to 1500 points of burn. Skull Invitation even had a few competitive placements in 2017 as part of an invoked Blue Eye strategy following the release of Invoked Makaba. Of course, that was in the side deck, but Skull Invitation did serve a purpose there. Burning your opponent for every lost card can really pressure decks with long combos and robust graves. Decks like 60 card Burning Abyss, which was pretty strong at the time, not to mention all the Infernoids, Shaddolls, and Lightsworns floating around. Skull Invitation is one of those cards that isn't dangerous until suddenly it is. 300 life points doesn't sound like much looking down from 8,000, but therein lies the insidious nature of Skull Invitation. When your opponent flips it on you, a countdown begins. Every choice you make is going to cost something, maybe until you have nothing left. If you ever lost to Nurse Burn, the next entry might be a little stomach-turning. Bad Reaction to Simochi is the number 3 continuous trap on this list. It's from 2003 set's Legacy of Darkness, and as mentioned, was commonly used alongside Dark Lord Nurse Rafikiel in the infamous strategy known as Nurse Burn. Because the ability to instantly inflict damage to your opponent's life points is pretty dangerous, burn cards tend to hit for smaller amounts, with some notable exceptions. Gaining life points, on the other hand, is a lot less risky, and generally hasn't required the same restraint. Just look at Red Resonator, the Aroma archetype, and even older cards like Draining Shield. But you really get to enjoy no limits when you decide to give life points to your opponent. Give card is a normal trap that instantly lets your opponent go plus 3000 life points on activation, and the Paths of Destiny puts both players through a coin flip that will either dispense or take 2000 life. Where this gets nasty is with Bad Reaction to Simochi and Dark Lord Nurse Rafikiel, since both have the effect to reverse life point gains and loss effects, making Give card an instant 3000 burn, and guaranteeing the Paths of Destiny's 2000. The idea of Nurse Burn strategies was to use draw power cards like Hand Destruction, Pot of Duality, One Day Apiece, Into the Void, and Upstart Goblin to dig one out of the life point reversal cards, and enough life point gainers to bring your opponent to 0 before they can even start their next main phase. While this strategy existed for a while as some good rogue-ready jank in the TCG, it very quickly broke Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links. Bad Reaction Simochi had long been part of the game, but Dark Lord Nurse Rafikiel and the Paths of Destiny were released in short succession to each other in early of 2024. With the format's lower starting life point value of only 4,000 and smaller deck sizes of 20 to 30, This combination of cards was predictably insanely powerful, and would shortly result in both Dark Lord Nurse Rafiki and Bad Reaction Simochi catching wholesale bans, while the Pass of Destiny got saddled with Duel Links' incredible strict Limit 1 designation, alongside such powerful threats as Super Polymerization, Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier, and Treacherous Trap Hole. Rising from its cold grave to claim number 2 in this list is Call the Haunted, one of the most famous continuous traps of all time. Entering the TCG as an ultra rare in 2002's Pharaoh's Servant set, Call the Haunted has seen more reprints than most cards will ever see competitive play. It's been in starter decks, structure decks, gold series, and it's even a skill card for speed duels. So no one should be surprised to see this card land a high spot on this list of best classic continuous traps that aren't floodgates. If you're watching this video, you most definitely already know what Call the Haunted does. But in case you're an ancient spirit that's been trapped in a gold puzzle for 5,000 years, I'll go over it real quick. Call the Haunted takes one of your monsters in the graveyard and special summons it in attack position, and then hangs around the field as an equip. Sometimes good cards have pages of text for 50 different effects, and sometimes their simplicity is what makes them strong. Anti-Spell Fragrance says no to spells. Raigeki clears your opponent's monsters. Call the Haunted brings a monster back, and it's been used a lot, peaking in 2014, 12 whole years after its release. While play in the present day has largely accelerated past the need for a generic continuous trap that revives a single target, Call the Haunted remains a staple in GOAT and Edison formats, where the only thing limiting its use is the Limit 1 designation. The real trouble with discussing Call the Haunted's relevance to the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that naming all the decks and strategies that use this card over the years would just take too long. So we'll settle in mentioning 10. Windwinch, Gear Gaia, Infernity, Cosmo, X-Saber, Destiny Heroes, Fire Fist, Artifacts, Stellar Knights, and Trap Tricks, amongst many others. Although limited to one copy until 2012 and banned outright for much of 2008 into 2009, Call the Haunted would cast a shadow over new releases, which often included cards that were like Call the Haunted, but balanced by being more specific and or worse. This wave included revival traps like Birthright for normal monsters, Fossil Excavation for dinos, Limit Reverse for low levels, Wicked Rebirth for synchros, and more. Also contributing to Call the Haunted's high status is its early appearance in episode 17 of the Duel Monsters anime. Used by the zombie duelist Bones against Joey Wheeler, Call the Haunted worked a little different in the episode, where instead of reviving a single target, it brought back all of Bones' vanquished monsters and turned them into zombies. Bones actually used Skull Invitation from a little earlier in this video as well, during his Battle City duel against Yami Bakura. It was one of the last things he ever did though, as he was immediately devoured by shadows upon losing. Call the Haunted was used by a bunch of duelists in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, including the Chaz, Zane Truesdale, Jinzo, Sar, Atticus Rhodes, Renegade Von Howell III, Alexis Rhodes, Jim Crocodile, Cook, Jaden, and Makoto and Sume. It would have more smaller appearances in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds and Zexal, but it makes sense that GX aired during GOAT format because everyone at Duel Academy had a copy of this card. To the number 1 spot on this list, I present Ultimate Offering. Despite releasing in 2002, Ultimate Offering wouldn't actually print in a more traditional set until 2010's Duel Terminal 3, but getting a copy before that wasn't hard since it was included in a large quantity of structure and starter decks. First in 2002's starter deck Yugi and Kaiba, and then following years starter decks Joey and Pegasus, and later structure decks Invincible Fortress and Machine Revolt. After a brief stint at 3 copies from its release until mid-2006, Ultimate Offering made a temporary move to the limited list until 2011, when it was let back in at 3 before getting swiftly banned forever in 2013. So why did this card get locked and forbidden? Because it was crazy. Like Skull Lair, Ultimate Offering is a continuous trap that can be activated at spell speed 2 whenever you like, as long as, per its specifications, you do so during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase. When you activate Ultimate Offering by paying 500 life points, you can immediately perform a normal summon or set. Importantly, there are no limits on how many times you can activate Ultimate Offering in a single turn, other than how many life points you have and how many monsters you hold. It's not hard to see why this card was pretty good early on when you could use Offering to work around the slower pace of the game by performing multiple normal summons. And it's not hard to see how being able to use those summons during your opponent's battle phase could throw an unprepared adversary off their game. It's also not hard to see why this card is probably never going to get unbanned without getting unrecognizably eroded first. When the extra deck only held fusion monsters, Ultimate Offering didn't really interact with it, but Synchros and Xyz monsters and later Links are all directly enabled by infinite normals. In the modern game, this ceiling for what you can do with this card no longer exists, and that's why you can't play it. But there are no restrictions on its use in GOAT format, and in Edison you can still play too. With Ultimate Offering Online, cards like Black Whirlwind and Gadgets can provide a huge amount of card advantage, and it did see competitive play, particularly in Mermail, Medulce, and Machina strategies. 2024's Phantom Nightmare set brought Ultimate Offering, a new continuous trap that's like Ultimate Offering, but a little worse. During your main phase, you can pay 1,000 life points to increase your total normal summons from 1 to 3, and during your opponent's battle phase, you can pay 500 life points to normal summon once, with both effects limited to a hard once per turn. On top of this, Ultimate Offering has some of the creepiest art yet printed, and it's very close to the original OCG artwork of Ultimate Offering, which was censored for international audiences, so it's kind of cool to see that both this card from 2002 and its artwork from even before then are not forgotten. It's got 2 anime appearances to count, with one in episode 85 of the YGO GX, when Franz used it to summon 3 copies of Ra's Disciple before attributing the Winged Dragon of Ra. Ultimate Offering's second appearance comes from the Pyramid of Light movie, where Pegasus uses Ultimate Offering against Seto Kaiba to support his tunes, even though the Blue Eyes Toon Dragon and Toon Summon Skull he played with it are actually able to special summon themselves and don't need it. But despite this confusing use by alleged Duel Monsters creator, Ultimate Offering is a very powerful card. It's slow, but opens up a wild amount of plays, and a well-deserved spot at number 1. Alright, and that's the list. But if I missed your favorite continuous trap from before the Synchro era that's not a Floodgate, let me know down in the comments. And if you have more ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about those too.